Good morning, all. Definitely a challenge, right? On a Saturday morning, talking on ESG or listening on ESG. But that is how our profession is. We are expected to be throughout the year really working for the profession, giving it back to the profession. Thanks. So largely today, while ESG is a new topic, relevant new topic, I won't say really new, but relatively new when we talk of other internal audit related activities, how ESG and internal audit can go hand in hand. Or I would say rather, how can we become a catalyst in helping companies really make a good ESG framework? While the ESG certification and other things will flow from other institutes, but how, as an internal audit, since we really audit operations of the companies, other aspects of the companies, how an ESG framework, developing a framework, and how, in extent to extent of which, how we can govern the framework so that the ESG scores goes up year on year. So largely, my presentation for next an hour would talk on how internal audit can become a helpful tool in ESG framework. So I mean, before I really come to the fifth element, which is role of internal audit in ESG reporting and implementation, I thought it's also better to give some idea in terms of what ESG really stands for, what is its meaning, understanding, what is the importance of ESG in terms of challenges, what are the drivers of ESG, potential risk on companies for non-compliance with ESG. I mean, that has been always, I mean, you read reports, financial reports, you will always see that some companies have scored well on an X parameter on ESG, but not scored well on other parameters, and how do they up the ante when it really comes to getting a reasonable score on the overall ESG. Implications for ESG management and disclosures. And then really talking of what is the role of internal audit, opportunities, main is opportunities of internal audit in ESG reporting, what our profession can contribute and what can be helped to the companies. In the current scenario, what are Indian companies' readiness for ESG disclosure? We'll talk a bit on it. Guidelines for companies on sustainability reporting, and maybe ESG framework, what can be the way forward. Any questions, any suggestions, please feel free to interrupt. No worries on that front. So what ESG really stands for is three elements: environmental, social, governance. Simple. But while it may sound very simple, how do you really implement all the elements of this three important element becomes a very dynamic tool. So largely, while always, corporate social responsibility is what we have been hearing. So that has been a very limited thing when it comes to giving back to the society. Now, ESG also is a social responsible investing. How companies invest in green initiatives, carbon neutral and other things, so that for the future generation, this becomes a very important element. And you would have seen it, investors also used to assess such data to really look into organizations' operations before investing. While earlier profits for most of these private equities and other companies was important, they also brought in this ESG element when they look into one of their decision-making tool for investing. I mean, we'll talk in subsequent things. So what really it means by environmental? So in terms of how companies really performs as a steward for nature. Over and you were talking some. So how the company looks into climate change, efficient use of natural resources, pollution, waste, biodiversity, etc. That is from an environmental impact. Other is social impact, how it manages its relationship with people, who are the stakeholders. what we mean by stakeholder is not only the company employee, but over and who are around the organizations, customers, vendors, the overall community as a large, labor management, health safety management, data security, those how company really monitors that also becomes one of the key element. And third is in governance. What is the tone at the top when it comes to the ESG parameters? So that is also becomes a very important tool in terms of transparency, accountability, board, how the board looks into and exercise their responsibility effectively in bringing up the ESG score. So this is the most important element which constitute an overall ESG framework in today's world. So why ESG is important? ESG is about the future. I mean, if you see most of the literature on ESG, it talks of how can a company really manage its future operations, not from a profitability or from a production and other operations, but an overall operations, be it environmental, and how this really helps bringing a positive change across several different sectors. Because while we may talk of one particular company, a good ESG will really impact other sectors around that particular organization. So while many people see business as a short-term profits, but the real cake is how one really looks from a future generation perspective and how best are the ESG parameters being managed. So if you see how, this chart really says how ESG parameters can then impress more on customers, vendors, and other aspects, like build corporate reputation with customers. Like 74% of the people in an analysis carried out mentioned that a good ESG score they would really look upon when they are investing. Comply with regulatory requirements, because a good ESG score means you are bound to comply with most of the regulatory required, be it pollution control board, wastage norms, and any other things. Demonstrate risk management. Now that also becomes a very important element when it comes to ESG. Respond to competitive pressure. Explain business strategies more clearly. A good ESG parameters can also explain your business strategies more clearly. Demonstrate return on ESG investment. Now that may not really be a direct apple to apple comparison, but in the longer run that can bear fruits. So that has been a key element, and cost saving and return on investment always be a low parameter, because these are the investments which may not really bring ROI, but this is more from an environmental perspective. So on the right hand side, it's investor echo strong support for recent call for greater CEO and board accountability. What does that really mean is, it should be the tone at the top, not really a responsibility of some mid or lower management, but it has to be tone at the top. Unless there is no proper governance from the top, long-term ESG issues will never be resolved. Like ranging from climate change to diversity to board, almost 42% of the respondents said that they really feel CEO and the top management should be responsible. 50% were agreeing to it. So almost 92% of the people were of the opinion that if a good ESG, it has to be driven from the top. About close to, again, 90% say it gives sustainable returns over time, but requires sharper focus, not only on governance. And again, close to 80% in both the categories agreed that there has to be environmental and social issues as well as public company CEO. Again, there should be a strategy. While companies may have sales strategy, purchase strategy, again, one important element should be explicit strategy. I may ask Chetan by here, like at JSW, I'm sure most of this element would be followed, right? So why ESG is important? Like certain surveys conducted by eminent organizations mentioned that about 80% of the participants from about close to 300 plus investors, they said they would consider ESG risk and opportunity as an important factor in investment decision making. While 49% said they would sell their investment if an organization is not showing enough action to address ESG issues. A big number again. If 50% are not ready to really take up their investment further, it can become a showstopper for any companies or any startups who want to have investment or who want to scale up their operations if they don't comply with ESG. Every 1 out of 5 USD of private equity venture capitalist investment had ESG focus in mind. I mean, this is again of first half of 2023. If we talk of first half of 2025, this could have gone a bit up. Again, a recent report by Deloitte indicated that companies increase their ESG scores have also seen a boost in their EBITDA multiple. So good, if your score of ESG is good, again, in a longer run, that helps you improve your profitability. Maybe in the short term, because of the compliance related issues, there can be a minor hit, but in the longer run, it always helps. Again, a survey done by CRISIL said 80% of the issuers and institutional investors intend to integrate ESG in their decision making. So most of the, what we feel and most of the literature which really talks, any further future investments when it comes to mergers, acquisitions, those kind of decisions, ESG will become a very important tool. And that is where we are here today, how as an internal auditor, we can help score, companies can score good in ESG. We'll talk in subsequent slide. Again, foreign investors, significant factors influencing the market preference of companies with strong ESG practices. While in India, yes, we are on a nascent stage, but maybe 4 or 5 years down the line with lot of private equity placements and those comings, investors coming, this can play a very important role. So what are the risks where there is a non-compliance with ESG? One is identification and assessment of main challenges, health, safety, environment that can be impacted if you don't have a proper ESG framework. Climate related risk can be one of the factors for sustainability. Human resources, again, identifying risk and challenges related to workforce. A very low ESG score, you can really say that their workforce in terms of managing the workforce will always have an impact. Health and FT, again, major industrial accident, workplace accidents, transport accident, impacting goodwill risk. Low the ESG scores means you will have higher risk of all this. Climate change related changes, again, regulatory challenges if a low ESG score can be impacted, and social challenges. So these are major challenges a companies face when you have a low ESG score. Again, human rights challenges, forced labor, discrimination. If you have all those things, your ESG non-compliance can be on a very high level. Corruption and tax evasion. In fact, if you see various reports in the financial statements, all this 6-7 risks, the companies are getting rated on this 6-7 risks, and their ESG score can be impacted accordingly. Supply chain challenges, whether they have safety, corruption, fraud, and other aspects. So the most important thing is how are this risk being maintained so that one, the ESG score is acceptable and which can bring in future investments to the company or any other future good capex. So what are impact on ESG on companies? again, ESG regulation requires companies to disclose their ESG performance or risk to investors. The reason being this helps increasing transparency and accountability. Other is the companies which fail to meet ESG standard may face reputational damage, goodwill risk. While in India, we may see a very lower end of such kind of impact because ESG is still, the overall framework is still developing. But when we go to Western world and you will see most of the companies with a low ESG score has an impact on their credibility. And ESG regulations again may require companies to change their business practices to align with ESG standards, which would again involve significant investment in new technology, processes, and systems. So now really coming to the main element of the topic, where an internal audit in ESG reporting and implementation can help. So first is our role. As an internal auditor, we can really be helpful in determining the ESG materiality. Every company is not equal, or every organization in a manufacturing capabilities may have very different ESG standards or ESG risks as compared to a service industry. So one is really deciding on the materiality and scope and identifying topic through a risk lens. That is another one of the most important element. Second is assess readiness to comply with the regulatory environment. Unless there is no readiness from the company's end to comply with the regulatory environment, the overall ESG framework development will become a big challenge. Helps in understanding ESG standards, demand and regulation the organization must comply with. Basically, how a risk assessment we do for a business, on the same parameters and on the same lines, one has to do a risk assessment of an ESG reporting and implementation. So you kind of identify the scope, then you really look into how the companies is ready to comply with such regulatory environment. Our role is to provide a critical assurance support by providing an independent and objective review of the effectiveness of ESG risk assessment, responses and controls. So one is developing a framework and then identifying the risk and what are the controls, or I would not use the word control here, but what are the parameters one can really take into consideration while mitigating the risk. Most important is validating accuracy and reliability of data used in ESG reporting. ESG report really talks of we have X ratio of men to women workers. They publish records. As an internal auditor, our role is to really, this is just one example. There are many such parameters. As an internal auditor, our role is to really validate what is getting reported is really true in spirit or not. It's on the same lines how we do internal audit, really validating the accuracy of the data reported, the same parameters apply here. And in terms of integrity of data reported, from where those data is collated, the genuinity of data, sources and other aspects. As an auditor or as an internal audit, we can really help company in terms of readiness. It's like before an external organization nominated by the overall ESG council comes for a review, how as an internal auditor we can help in terms of assessing the readiness of the company, so that when a real ESG is being looked into by external agencies, there are not many gaps which that can be observed. And on an ongoing basis, what we do for our profession or during internal audits, conducting benchmarking exercise to assess the maturity of companies' ESG control environment and processes. So ESG actually is a journey. Unlike internal audit, where you look into a particular process end to end, then give an opinion, ESG actually is a journey. It's a journey year on year, how you improve on your parameters. So as our role, again, I would re-emphasize time and again, it's not really doing ESG audit, but providing assurance and advice so that the reports which are published by the ESG Council are cross-validated with the data reported. So reporting accurately and consistency is critical. One is core function. We provide independent objective assurance and advice central to his mission. Again, because the ESG risks are increasingly influencing strategic decisions, what an reliable assurance in terms of what is data reported as a risk management exercise is one as an internal audit can help. And last is provide assurance in terms of ensuring credibility, transparency, and effectiveness. That's the key role of internal audit.
I have a question.
Please.
As far as this governance part is concerned, wherein the composition of the board, the pay, and everything that comes into place, how as an internal auditor that is useful, or how can we highlight the differences, and how do we actually come to know that there is a risk involved into that?
Sorry, I just missed some part. Can you just repeat the question?
Yeah, as far as governance part is concerned, when it comes to board of directors composition,
Hmm.
the pay structure, the executive part of it, how do we actually as an internal auditor, how do we actually compare whether there is any risk involved in that?
Very tricky question to answer, but nevertheless, I will give my best answering it. See, largely, what you really look into it. One, how is the composition of board decided? In terms of, so hypothetically assuming you have 3 independent directors, 4 independent directors, what is their journey in terms of this profession, in whichever profession they are? And then you really see whether he is a fit for this role or not.
But is an internal auditor going to do that?
See, it depends on whether that is a part of my scope or not.
But if we are talking about ESG and when it comes to governance, then definitely that is a
So again, to answer your question, ma'am, we look into processes. Point number 1, has company really followed the process as laid down by the Companies Act in terms of appointing the directors? Point number 1. Does the director composition is in line with as required by the Companies Act? I mean, a classic example, I won't name companies, but everyone knows many companies where a promoter's wife or someone is a lady director or is a woman director, and that suffices the requirement, but it does not suffice in a real true sense a governance element which is required. As an ESG auditor, our role is yet still you can comment on it that this is not in line with the good governance, but to implement that particular element rests with the management and the board. But nobody stops us from commenting as a part of the ESG governance, not as a part of the internal audit governance. As an ESG governance, those can be brought up as one of the element, but our role cannot be in implementing it.
but the
Risk
risk is still
still stays. See, I tell you, few of our clients, private equity placements didn't go through for 2 elements. One, the related party transactions were a bit grey, and 2, no woman independent director. So, because the risk was there, it impacted their private equity placement for at least a year. Once they corrected that, they could get it.
So this was highlighted in the internal audit.
No, this was not high. I mean, this is just an example. It's not that we did that review or something, but this was one element because of their ESG report and certain elements which were highlighted by someone else. This was taken by foreign private equity investor. First, you get this corrected, then we come on board. But that may not happen every time. No, but someone if really requires an investment and they are willing to do it, then that's not an easy thing. But you will see 80% of the companies are truly independent today. I mean, at least 80% or 90% of the companies which I audit are in a real sense truly independent. I mean, you have board composition in line with what is required as per the Companies Act, the experience of the board members in different fields, it's up to the mark.
But yet women independent directors are not getting appointed as it is needed.
Sorry?
Yet women independent directors are not getting appointed as per the policy which is being required to be implemented.
There is a challenge, I won't disagree to it, but at the same time, many women directors, I mean, this is what I've heard, this is not my evaluation, are also not really forthcoming in joining the board. No, I mean, this is what I had heard from one of the promoter. See, the Companies Act requires requirements, or I would say compliances have also gone up high. So if it's a truly independent company, then it's easy for you to get step on board. I have a point in later, but I would strongly advocate it being a part of the, yes, sorry.
So maybe I can request post discussion we can keep a question answer.
No. Sure. So again, assurance. What is one? Stage one is assurance over ESG reporting. Should really include at minimum review reporting matrices. That is very important. Here we are not here to find faults. One is whether the data which is reported are in line with what is requirement. If not, one has to be corrected. Not that you make an audit report, is one has to be corrected. Validate both qualitative and quantitative disclosures. And third, on the data integrity. So these are the three elements which is very important. Check consistency with financial disclosures. Many times it happens that you look into the qualitative data, but it may not match with the financial disclosures. So how the reconciliation is happening and how that can really be aligned. And conflicting information may trigger concerns for regulators and investors, because there are very limited data one can really assess. So if there is some gap observed between both the datas, it can create a problem. And conduct materiality risk assessment in terms of what ESG information is material to stakeholders. What can influence the judgment of a reasonable user? So that is very important. Interpretation varies, but clarity is essential. So when giving a report on ESG, clarity is very important, and link the company's sustainability goals and commitments to materiality threshold. So in the year one, don't have 50 parameters as a framework, then becomes very difficult to even achieve 5 years down the line. So as I said earlier, ESG is a journey. It is not a 1 year practice or a give financial report for FY26 and move on to FY27. No, it's a journey. To answer Zara, your question, incorporating ESG into internal audit plan. I mean, it's strongly advocated that internal audit, I mean, we will also, as an internal audit profession, we'll also have to think into new areas. And incorporating ESG into internal audit plan should be the case. We may falter in year one. Companies may have a different view, अरे वो तो वो दूसरी organization करती है ना, आप क्या add करोगे? But where we can really help is before that organization comes, what could have been achieved in year 3 will help them achieve in year 1 in terms of better readiness. Like current gap, ESG related audits only form less than 1% of your internal audit plan. That has to change. That definitely will have to change. And it is how you convince the client. I remember 5, 7, 8 years back, clients were not really ready for capital expenditures audit 10, 12 years back. आप उसमें क्या ऐड करोगे? Production में आप क्या value add करोगे? But over the years now, that has become a regular internal audit practice. So I'm pretty confident ESG as an audit area would become a normal practice. Again, ESG risks are becoming strategically significant for the organization. So integrate ESG into audit plan, prioritize ESG risk areas. I mean, at least what we felt is climate impact, social responsibility, and governance practices. These are the top 3 ESG risk areas. And enhance audit scopes to include sustainability related controls. You know, one can always compromise on one area if the client is not willing to pay more. One can always compromise on one of the area but bring in the ESG element. Second is on the advisory role where an audit can help. A minimum following components, how you can establish ESG controls. So leverage framework like COSO internal control to integrate into an ESG framework. Develop specific internal controls for ESG data and reporting. It's a normal internal audit what we do for many areas. Pick up an ESG area, and I'm sure with all the experience we all have, developing an ESG related controls will not be a difficult task. Identify relevant matrices which can be qualitative, quantitative, and reflect actual sustainability efforts. Because most important is sustainability. I mean, like we in Anija Associate have this control effectiveness index as one of the thing. Once it starts reaching a high level, the discussion with the client is, how do you sustain this? The same applies here. How do you sustain once you have reached a particular ESG level or a parameter marks? So that always the challenge to the company is sustaining it, and that is where how internal audit can help or become helpful in sustaining the same. And advice on ESG governance would be roles and responsibilities for ESG oversight, training on ESG related control, and overall holistic risk view to strengthen governance structures. So what we have seen is companies come to us as before EcoVadis and those ESG organizations do their audit, where you can come and help us improve our score as compared to last year. So that is where our role should be. So again, what we had seen is, this is again a couple of years earlier, there has been not much study again done, but about 2/3 of the companies globally have yet to implement ESG controls. So big work for us. If companies don't have a bandwidth to do, why not we step in and at least help to some extent develop ESG controls. And 60% do not currently perform internal ESG audits. That is done by purely outside audits, but there has been no internal ESG audit. The objective in the longer run should be, we should have kind of a continuous audit on ESG parameters, at least for the top A companies. And why it is important, we'll talk in subsequent, because there are SEBI regulations, Companies Act, which have now really said who all companies should really be there. Top 1,000 Fortune companies should have ESG, and also much work for as an internal audit profession, is just one has to tap it. So overall, it's like really mapping sustainable development goals, who are the main stakeholders, material assessment, risk management approach, KPI performance indicators, how one will have a payroll performance indicators should also can be defined in KPI performance indicators, and define sustainability goals based on the strategy. That's another one of the most important element where internal audit can help. And why? Currently, only 27% of Indian organizations are equipped to meet their ESG strategy. So, this slide is largely talking about how, as an internal audit, we can help companies' readiness for ESG disclosures. While 68% of the organizations have made significant progress by integrating ESG strategies and mechanisms, we can now really look into whether those mechanisms and strategies are really getting implemented on the ground. They may have developed strategies, but are they really implemented on ground? In the first, we can help in developing their ESG strategy. Again, half of the organizations reported a thorough understanding of ESG reporting mechanism. So there are other half which are still to develop all this. That is where we can come into picture. Regulations can be a major challenge. So that is again then developing a checklist in terms of what is really required, how you will do a compliance audit. This can be one of the other elements, developing an ESG checklist. So this has been the journey of how an evaluation of ESG reporting in India has developed. Like in 2015, SEBI came with the BRR guidelines, then there was this stewardship code. So this is driven by SEBI and Ministry of Corporate Affairs. But if you see, introduced BSSR in 2021, we have 1,000 listed companies on the market cap from 2023 are expected to, are in fact required to disclose their ESG. So big work. And today is 1,000. May come 2026, 2028, the number of companies are going to increase. So there, and we as an internal auditor, this can be a new area of work. So again, the business responsibility and sustainability guidelines is, again, it talks of assurance on BSSR core. When we talk of reasonable assurance, is the same thing where as an internal audit, we can help give that assurance. And these are the elements what the BSSR talks of. I mean, this may not be, all of them cannot be applicable to all the companies, but one will have to pick and choose, which is more material to that industry, to that organization. Be it water footprint, waste management, gender diversity, customer suppliers engagement, greenhouse footprint, energy footprint, and so on and so forth. So out of this key 9 principles, depending on the companies which you audit are into, one can pick up the top 3 and look upon what best controls, ESG controls, can be instituted. Now, there are ESG frameworks, basically used by companies for disclosure of data governing business operations and opportunities and risk in ESG aspects of the business. Typically, all this top ESG certification organization either look into one of these 4, which is SDGs, which is Sustainable Development Goals, or Task Force on Climate, or Global Reporting Initiative, or Carbon Disclosure Projects. There are 4 or 5 frameworks which are kind of used by these top companies. One can refer to one of those framework or a mixture of all and develop controls. I mean, largely a GRC checklist. So this is in terms of what we talk. This is largely in terms of where an internal audit can fit into developing a sample framework for the company. Right from, these are the elements. I mean, I don't know to what extent it is readable. So Jinal, do we circulate this presentation? Okay. So largely what we really talk is, you kind of develop a framework. It's same like a risk register. You analyze roles and responsibilities in terms. So when we talk of framework, it is like top management and decision. Those are the drivers of ESG. It starts from the top. In ESG, there cannot be a bottom-up approach. It always will be a top-down approach. Other is separate board level committee. Same like a remuneration committee, CSR committee, there is a need for an ESG committee. And obviously that ESG committee will be an oversight committee. What we really would be a management committee who would look into day-to-day operations related to ESG and its framework, and a working group which is like it's typically, so this framework, and on the right hand side is if you take an 18-month kind of a journey, how you develop a framework right from top management role till the governance performance parameters. Typically what we have seen, our experience is it takes about 18 to 24 months to develop a framework for a first study. So where companies who are not in that top 1,000 and you feel would reach that level in near future, one should start tapping those companies to develop a framework today. Because those top 1,000 companies will any which ways a framework. That is where our role would be to really look into how they are sustained in their ESG goals and parameters and their scores. But for the other companies, the role of internal audit can actually widen up in helping them develop a framework. Then the other is in the ESG due diligence and gap assessment. So your first 2-3 months you look into developing a top management committees. Another 3-4 months goes into the gap assessment, review and other elements. Closure of gaps in terms of what are the mitigating controls that can be implemented to close that gaps. The further journey would be in terms of once those gaps, mitigating measures are kind of implemented to really check whether those gaps are really closed, and that would be a ongoing exercise. So if you see certain elements, it is from month till the end of the project. Then business strategies, sustainability report. So largely what we are really trying to look upon is, one, you have a top committee being defined. Two, due diligence being done by their internal team in coordination with the internal audit team or external consultants. Three, those gaps are kind of, they claim those gaps have been closed, and that is where we come into picture in terms of sustainability report or review. So our role largely the first year should typically go into developing a framework and implementation of the framework. While we may be able to help them, but the last 6 months of the ESG review should be really dedicated to the internal audit work. And then year on year, it is just to sustain those controls, basically. Great, thank you. Hope to some extent I have been able to really tell what ESG is. Any questions, suggestions, please? Mix of both. Even today what we have seen is, even a promoter-driven company who wants a good reputation, good valuation, are not shying away from ESG. So, that notion of, while we always will have a notion of promoter-driven company will have lesser controls or centralized controls, but that is also changing. And I have seen companies who are purely promoter-driven, but their controls for environment, health and safety are really good. They look forward for external help in improving those controls. They have dedicated safety committee, meetings of the safety committee are held frequently, regularly, not just because it is required under Factories Act, but for their own betterment.
सर हाँ सर अपने पास 15
Yeah. Sir,
Oh,
sir, are there any specific reports for which has to be presented to regulators related to ESG?
so there is this sustainability report which is to be presented. But if you can pick up any financial statements, the year-end financial statements of any companies, the annual report, it is a part of that.
Okay. No, none other than that.
No, none other.
So sir, we have CA Chetan Thakkar also, who is ESG expert and heading JSW Steel. So may I request him also to come on dais, and maybe sir we can contribute. So any questions, most welcome.
So I have one question in regards to the applicability of ESG. As you mentioned, it is applicable to top 1000 entities. But can one of you give us a practical example that if a company gets listed for the first time next year, and hoping that it will be in the first in the top 1000 listed entities, then by when actually the ESG becomes applicable to them?
Immediate effect.
If it's the immediate effect, if it is falling under top 1000 by market cap, even it is a first time being enlisted, it is immediately applicable.
By immediately you mean the day it becomes listed?
Yeah, it is all about the disclosure requirement. You know, normally it happens by June, July. In your annual report, you have to give all the disclosure.
Okay.
And if it is falling under the top 1000 by market cap, immediate basis. I think, Parag bhai, that would be the view, please.
See, if hypothetically you listed on say August 1st, sorry, hypothetically you listed on August 1st, 2025, your FY26 report itself should have the ESG thing.
Okay.
Leave aside that, even when you give your DHRP and other things, you are expected to give the ESG report to some extent.
Okay, so what I have read is that, so for example, in a scenario where we get listed next year in March, so the stock exchanges give list of all the, based on market capitalization, they give list of entities for the period July to December. So if my company gets listed in Feb next year, then my company will be listed for the period July to December. And that particular listing would come by December next year, which is 2026. And as per LODR, it becomes applicable from once you are in 1000
So
entities.
FY27 you mean?
Yeah, so you have 3 months from 1st April or 3 months once you get listed, whichever is earlier is the applicability date. So according to me, if someone gets listed next year in the first quarter, then ESG becomes applicable to them from financial year 27-28.
Because one of my client faced the same thing, but for them it was applicable immediately, is what we were given to understand.
Okay. Thanks for answering that.
So just to add on, Parag bhai, whatever the mandate to follow getting into ESG reporting, but it is a kind of benefit what demonstrated by Parag bhai in terms of her reputation, you get a better investor.
It adds value,
So
right?
those, it is good idea to get it at the earliest. Let's not wait for the
Correct.
exact cutoff date to follow.
Of
So
course.
practically that's a good idea to do that at the
Right.
earliest, please.
Correct. Thank you.
Yeah, as a voluntary, companies will do it.
Yeah, thank you, Parag sir, for very informative session on ESG. Very wonderful session, sir. I have 2 questions. One is, it is that ESG is relatively new, and 2/3 companies are still implementing the ESG framework. And so, when you start it, like, how do you pitch, like, what are the short-term goals or long-term goal we have seen, but in a early stage, like, how they will achieve the short-term goals so that they immediately implement the ESG framework in the organization? Second, when we do the process audit, what are the key focus or data points we should collect for the ESG so that when we do the ESG, the burden will reduce so that, because ESG is not for the particular area or department where we need to collect the information from across the department and understand how the ESG is actually implemented at a very true sense. So what are the key focus during the process audit so that it will help us to do the ESG audit?
So to answer your question, if one of my slide I mentioned there were 9 elements. One, looking into which company you are auditing or which industry you are auditing, and as you just said, if it's a new, what are the materiality from those elements?
Okay.
You may, like water, for example, if it's a service industry, water harvesting would not really mean. But for them, most important would be gender diversity. So you pick up those 2-3 elements, list down what is requirements which can bring up their ESG score, or at least to start with what can be a ideal score for ESG. And when you do the data checkpoints, one has to really see from an HR data what is the ratio of men versus female, male versus female in the overall HR database.
See, basically, I think Parag Bhai has already shown right now there is no fixed framework across all. Across this 1,000 company, we follow BRSR. And there are more than 400 matrices. Just let's take a quick poll. How many of us do ESG audit as a dedicated audit, one of like P2P, O2C, or maybe procurement audit? How many of us do dedicated ESG audit as an internal audit? Just show of hand. Just let me see how, as a poll, how many people exclusive ESG audit?
Yes, we have, it's part of audit universe.
Yeah, so that's the second strategy. I think most of we internal auditor, like when we do HR audit, we do social part, we do cultural audit, we take of governance issue, compliance issue. When E comes to, we do EHS safety audit. So that is embedded in our respective audit processes. Anybody doing dedicated ESG audit have done in last couple of years? Is it good idea to do it? But I'm not sure how many of us we do that. Or the way I explained the second strategy, part of the EHS audit, statutory compliance audit, cultural audits. That's how we are doing it, right? Can I hear from someone?
Yes.
Yeah? We don't do ESG audit dedicate. But I think that's a way forward. What we look at as a best practice to do that, please.
A comprehensive audit.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Parag. Wonderful presentation. So my question is from a firm's perspective. Like, if a firm which is practicing internal audit, what should they do to make this as a area of service? Like any certifications that can be done, or what learnings should they get, basically?
Certification is always necessary. Without that, it becomes really difficult for us to go and pitch to the client. Where we should be really positioning ourselves. You have an organization, you have EcoVadis and those big names. Between that, to start with, between that is that what we should be positioning ourselves.
I add on to Parag Bhai. I know many firms, forget about Big Four, now they have their own vertical for serving ESG sustainability. There are mid-sized firms. Of the last year, they started a dedicated division to serve this. Because this is a promising area within internal audit as a non-conventional area. I think earlier the better, we as a practitioner should, earlier the better you get into this practice. And this has a promising future as well. Even I am from industry, I insist on that, please.
Thank you.
Yeah, please. Ma'am, want to say something?
Sir, in your slide, you had, one of the things, stewardship code for AIF and mutual fund. Could you maybe explain more on how the AIF or the mutual funds are required? Are they required to do it for their listed entities or from an investment management company perspective? So what is it that they are supposed to do under ESG? Because this, business sustainability reporting standard would not be applicable if the investment management company is not listed.
So it would probably be for their investee company which are listed. So how does that work?
See, what I meant by that was, as an investee company, if you are expected to really comply with it, as an investment company, you have to have an oversight on it. Because that would then affect your investment in long run.
But this would be only for the listed companies in which they have in which
So-
the IMC has invested?
No, so requirement is for top 1,000 companies.
Right.
Others are largely as a voluntary disclosure to have more transparency and other aspects.
Okay, all right.
As I explained you earlier also, it's a good to do. Although even you are not part of that 1,000 listed, but if somebody who is with the better ESG rating and somebody would it never or to be yet not started, the kind of investment or a rate of investment what is going to attract would be immensely different footprint.
It is generally there, when you read the agreement, so ESG clause would be there with their
Yeah,
investors,
certainly,
but
certainly.
how much is getting implemented because it is not regulatory required as such.
So basically the foreign PE investor insist on that and they invest better with return and those things to the companies who follows ESG parameters.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you.
So ESG versus CSR. So can you little bit elaborate the difference between these two?
See, I will say in a very simple word, ESG is old wine in a new bottle. CSR is what traditionally we are doing. So as I told you, CSR being a part of social governance. The second S of the ESG is CSR, what we are doing over ages. So it's a old wine in a new bottle, a new buzzword, ESG. Parag, I want to add something.
No, you are absolutely right.
Let's understand very simple, simplistic way, please. Any more questions? We are happy to take. We would like to thank Parag Bhai and close of the session, please. Any more questions? We are happy to take.
So may I request C.A. Parul Shah to propose a well-deserved vote of thanks. Friends, it was fantastic session. Sir, thank you for coming and contributing. Knowledge when shared multiplies. And thank you, Chetan sir, for
My
contributing.
Always my pleasure.
So thank you Parag Bhai for giving the wonderful session regarding the ESG and giving us the totally full approach, how it's apply, how the reportings and procedures related to ESG. Thank you very much, Parag Mehta and Chetan Bhai. Thank you. And we have now 15 minutes tea break. And next is AI session and speaker has already come. Yeah, one pic with Parag Bhai.